your soul is built around intimacy, but the soul then is now in a physical form, and they interact with each other very, very early on. The soul influences the development of the immune system through human touch and human love. And so how you can deny that we are not spiritual beings, or how you deny we are spiritual beings, is beyond me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you grow in your faith. We're here to coach you up, especially in the way you think, because how you think will affect what you believe, and what you believe is one of the most important things about you. And we want you to have a strong, powerful faith that can withstand the pressures of time. We're going to be introducing a whole new series today, but before we do, my name is Jesse Mayer. I'll be your host, but we cannot do this without the one, the only, the salty pastor himself, Dr. Douglas Peak.
Hey, everyone. So good to be with you. I just want to say a shout out to the big salty crew joining the Salty Pastor. We're just having a lot of fun here, really digging into things. This week is a big week because this week we're going to launch the Salty Pastor website.
Yes, we are.
I'm pretty excited about that. So do us a favor. And when do we think that that'll be up, like live and running?
Live and running for you guys to enjoy will be Friday.
Okay.
But if it launches a day early, those who like and subscribe will get a notification to know that they can hop on there and see all the cool new things.
Sweet. So go to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and like and subscribe. Get those subscriptions up because it allows us to embed links from YouTube and various other things. And so we'd love for you to support that by liking and subscribing. Also, if, you'll be able to donate directly, I hope, to the Salty Pastor through the website as well. So we're excited about all this new development. The biggest reason why, though, I want to do this website is I want a one-stop place where you can go and you can look at past episodes. There will be a search function there. You can look at passages of Scripture that we've talked about or podcasted on, and so certain topics. And so it's just going to be a really beneficial tool if you're kind of searching and looking for various things. And I just hope that it really benefits you. I hope it helps you grow in your faith, and I hope it helps you over the course when you want to remember something or go back and check it out and share it with a friend. So pretty excited about it. I'm pretty pumped, and it's going to be awesome.
Absolutely. And we are kicking off our brand new series for the next 4 to 5 weeks, all about human sexuality and intimacy. And so as these will be the topics discussed, I would like to warn you, parents, if you like to listen to the Salty Pastor with your kids in the room.
Or in the car.
That this may not be the best 4 weeks for you to be doing that. So
you might want to pre-screen the episode before you let your 8-year-old listen.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about some mature topics that you may not be wanting to answer the questions your kids have for you on those things in the next couple weeks. So just use your own discretion, and that's all we're going to say about that. But we're going to be talking about intimacy and human sexuality. What is it? Why is it such a powerful drive within most human beings? And why does it seem to be so confusing in our current day and age?
Yeah, today it seems like there's just a lot of confusion around sexuality and sexual identity, sexual practice. And it got me to thinking about, well, why is it? You know, I'm always into like, where do ideas come from? I don't think there's any trends that we are experiencing today in our culture that weren't seeded into our culture and then widely adopted. And so if we go back, this is the upstream principle, and kind of look at where they came from, I call this derivation. Where did it derive from? What happens is we can learn a lot and also understand how we got from there to here, because it's been a pretty massive shift in American society. It seems like our culture today is absolutely obsessed with sex. I thought it would be a good idea then to do a deep dive into this topic, particularly sexuality and what is actually going on in our world. And my first question is this, why is sexuality, why is sex such a big deal in our lives? Why is it something that can be marketed? Why is it something that billions of dollars can be made off of? Why is it such a central theme to human experience? Why is it so important to us as people? And the reason why I think that is because it has everything to do with our souls. The reason why sex and sexuality is such a big deal is because we are spiritual beings. This is really important. We are not physical beings that have a soul. What we are is we are souls that have physical bodies. Now, listen to this preacher, an old Southern Baptist preacher a while back, and he says, have you ever wanted to look at somebody who can't die? Somebody who's never going to die? He goes, well, you're looking at him. And I thought that was kind of funny. He was like, I'm never going to die. Now, my physical body is going to die, but my soul will live forever. And he was just in a dramatic way making a statement of truth. And that is, we are now souls. And once your soul is in existence, what happens is your physical body passes, but Scripture teaches you get a new body in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, not made with earthly hands, but made with heavenly hands. Your earthly body is like a tent. Your heavenly body is like a building from God. So what is that building house? It houses your soul. So what we are is we are spiritual beings that have a physical body, but our physical bodies have a lot of influence on our souls. And if we try to separate sex and sexuality from our soul, then this is where you get really confused. It originates in this desire to separate. Well, I have a soul, it's completely separate from my physical body and its desires, or all I have is a physical body and I don't have a soul, it has no influence over me. When you try to think that way, which I would say is Gnostic thinking, which is what John dealt with in his 3 letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, was the Gnostic influence in the church. It's been around thousands of years. But if we think Gnostically, then what happens is we get really, really confused. And it's in that separation of sexuality and sex from your soul where all the hurt, all the pain, and all the disappointment and suffering comes from in this arena. It's where all the abuse and toxicity and destructive behaviors come from in this world. Because in the end, sex and sexuality is all about intimacy, right? And intimacy is always about your soul. So we can't separate them.
Yeah, I think even just that thought process right now, you could just walk off the stage and drop the mic, right?
Okay.
That is something that is not talked about in our culture, in our lives, even at church most of the time, I would say, until you've brought it up.
Yep.
I haven't been here as long as you've been preaching here, so I'm sure this is not a new thought you're introducing to your preaching style, but I think having this reminder of we do kind of think about it as separate, right? We do have this mindset, and it's the same with a lot of things that we separate when our faith and our soul come into play of, oh, well, my body grows when I work it out, but my soul's different. It doesn't need working out, or my faith doesn't need working out. There's just this constant idea that we need to be reminded that these are all interconnected. And if we're not growing and we're not connecting those in our minds, then we're going to treat them as separate when they're really not. And so can you talk to me about why there is a connection between sex and sexuality and a person's soul? Can you tie those together for me?
I think one of the things that's really important to understand is how we arrived, why these things are so intimately linked. It's really interesting because Gnostic philosophy has been around for thousands of years. As I said earlier, when you read the New Testament, when you read it over and over and over again, what you really see is something quite fascinating, and that is pre-70 AD. And 70 AD is a very seminal event in the early church because that's when Rome had become sick and tired of the Jewish faith. And so in 67 AD, Vespasian sent his son Titus, who eventually became emperor. But Titus went and he besieged Rome for 3 years. He surrounded it, he starved everybody out, and then he tore Rome down and destroyed the temple. And this basically in 70 AD is the sign that and all in all is that Judaism was done, okay? And they have never practiced animal sacrifice since then. Okay, now on a total side note, this is why everybody is freaking out about the red heifers that have been taken to Israel, because they think that because they think they're going to have a reinstatement of the sacrifice of the red heifer, which has to do with the end times. So one of my jokes is that if you really want attendance to go up at church, is you can preach on sex. Or you can preach on
the end times.
But if you really want your attendance to go through the roof, preach on sex during the end times.
You're just going to double them up.
That's salty there. But the whole point of me talking about the play out of the scriptures is that it starts off where in the book of Acts, you see Judaizers were the problem. All right. Mm-hmm. But then in 70 AD, what happened is Judaism and its influence was greatly waned because of what happened with Rome. And that was extant from what was happening with New Testament Christianity at the time in some ways. Now, a lot of people say the book of Hebrews was written to the people who were under siege, the Roman siege of Jerusalem. And that's why he basically makes the arguments he does. But then what happens is you see a distinct shift in the letters, and that all has to do with this notion that Gnosticism became a huge influence. And so then they started battling Gnosticism. And then when you read in the the early second century writings, that was a predominant problem they had. And all the first five basic heresies of the church all had to do with the nature and deity of Jesus Christ. And the reason why is because they were all Gnostic in origin, okay? Gnosticism was just a basic Greek philosophy that split the spirit from the physical world. In other words, they were two distinct things. And so
they basically took what we are kind of doing on our own and just made it a philosophy and a statement, right? Like, I would say in modern days, we kind of think this way already.
Yeah, we're very dualistic.
They put it into basically a philosophical movement.
And that's what's so interesting about Jesus is that he came in the flesh, right? And then he died on the cross, and then he rose again in the flesh, even though he was God. So what God has always been doing is bringing together the physical and spiritual realm. You are a manifestation of that. You have a soul and a body. So we need to bring them together. It's when we split them in two that causes all the hurt and confusion and the wounds, right, in our lives. And so we think Gnostically in our world today. And what's interesting is, though, this is why we struggle with ever feeling fulfilled, and most particularly why we never experience authentic intimacy. Because intimacy is a core attribute of your human soul. Now, atheists, secular humanists, scientific materialists, naturalists, and so forth do not believe that human beings have a soul. There is no spiritual part of you. That you're not technically sentient or conscious. It's an illusion of the mind. Now, human beings are simply, what they're saying is a product of their environment and the evolutionary process. But if you don't like the implications of having a soul, this is extremely attractive, because if you have a soul, then how I treat other people and behave towards them impacts my soul, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Otherwise, it's just reduced to transactionally. I'll use people or treat people in a way that benefits me the most. So it's really interesting. If you don't believe in the implications of having a soul, this approach of humanism or secular scientific materialism, atheism is very attractive. I totally get why people believe it today, because there's an initial sense of freedom. I'm totally free. I can do whatever I want. And there's an appearance of intellectualism, and that is I'm throwing off the constraints of society and the social constructs that are imposed upon me. But as an old preacher once asked, well, if you strip away all the social restraints on you, what if you find out you're an onion? And there's nothing left. And there's some wisdom in that, you see. I understand why this is attractive, but if you strip everything off and there's no reason, always ends up in the same place, and that's meaninglessness. It always evolves or devolves right into nihilism every single time. So here's the rub. Here's where I think being a human being and answering your question is so important. And that is, if you believe you have a soul and you want the best kind of life, then you can't combine the, well, I don't have a soul mentality with the I do have a soul mentality, because that really messes up your life. And the manifestation is, well, there's a separation from my physical and spiritual self. So basically, this is what I'm trying to say. If you have a soul, never live as if you don't have one. Because if you believe that you have a soul, the most important question to ask is this: how does my physical decisions, my physical life impact my soul? What does my soul desire? What does it long for? What does my soul need in order for me to experience joy and happiness, meaningfulness, purpose, love, peace, all these wonderful, incredible things? Now, if I don't have a soul, those things are just figments of your imagination. But if you do have a soul, those things are a thirst of your soul. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the best way to get those things, those thirsts of my soul, quenched? And this is where the definition of your nature has a powerful impact on your life. The Bible unequivocally defines you as a physical being, a human being with a living soul. The library of 66 books answers the most profound and deepest question about your experience. And that is, here is the longing of your soul. What your soul longs for is intimacy. Therefore, the entire series is all about intimacy, the thirst of your soul, and why it's so difficult for us to find it.
Well, and I think us trying to really define how are sex and intimacy related and how are they not related, right? Like, I think that is where the biggest amount of confusion is most people are under the assumption that sex is intimacy, and it's
Correct.
one of the only ways to find intimacy.
Correct.
And it's the prime way to find intimacy,
Yes.
right?
Correct.
And so it's become so obsessive about this one aspect. And while it can be related and part of it, it's not the only way, and it's not the end all be all of intimacy. Intimacy is a higher level, right? And I think that's even, the phrase sexual intimacy makes it sound like, oh, well, this is the thing, right? And it's
Correct.
like, well, no, it's just a layer. And I think you're going to be talking about this, and I'd like you to start I know we have a couple weeks worth of this, so you're probably going to get into all kinds of things. But give us just a sneak preview of like, what is the connection between sex and intimacy? Where should we draw the line of this is,
Well, I think the best way to answer that question is to ask yourself, well, what exactly is my nature? What is my nature? Because it's really interesting, and that is sexual intimacy, sexual identity is part of the thirst of your soul. There's an old theologian who used to say that a man entering a church and a man entering a brothel have more in common than you could ever imagine.
That's a spicy take.
That's a really salty take. I read it once and I've remembered it ever since, and that was 40 years ago. So it is. It's pretty spicy, but it begins when you go back to Genesis and you ask yourself, well, what is my nature? This is really an important question. What is my nature? And the creation account is such interesting literature, because chapter 1 is the overview, and then chapter 2 kind of goes back, right, and looks more specifically not as the general creation of the universe, but the specific creation of humanity.
Right.
So we see chapter 1, the general creation,
kind of macro level, and
then chapter 2, it goes back and talks about the creation of humanity in and of itself. So this is why in verse 26 of chapter 1, it says, God said, let us make mankind in our image according to our likeness. And this phrase is very important in the Hebrew. According to that which is like our nature. Okay? So that which is our likeness. So you don't when you look in a mirror, you're not seeing a reflection of God in any way, shape, or form. Certainly hope you don't feel that way.
I don't.
Yeah, most people don't. So he's not referring to our physical capacity, but is he referring to something physical? Because some people make the mistake, in my opinion, of saying, well, this is just a spiritual thing. He's saying you have a soul, right? Okay, that's true. But don't think Gnostically by separating it, which is also dualistic thinking. You got to think in the wholeness. And that is that there are things in your physical nature that represent this likeness. Well, what is the likeness? What does it mean, the same nature? Well, it says, look at what he does. If you look at the singular pronoun for God in all of the 25 verses prior to this, they are all singular. If you look at the pronoun for God and referencing to himself, it's now the plural. Let us. This is the very first reference to the Trinity in the Bible, in the creation account, right? Is God referencing as pagans would say, or the Greeks would say, a bunch of different personalities and gods on Mount Olympus? No, he's referring to himself, his Son within himself, the Holy Spirit, the three in one. And what he's saying is we have this intimacy amongst ourselves, and so this must be reflected in man. This is why this is really important. When babies are born, right, without parents, and what happens is they hire people to come in and hold the babies now. Because you know why? If a baby isn't held by another human being, its immune system won't develop. So just being held and loved and caressed. Now, isn't that interesting? Is that your soul is built around intimacy, but the soul then is now in a physical form, and they interact with each other very, very early on. The soul influences the development of the immune system through human touch and human love. And so how you can deny that we are not spiritual beings, or how you deny we are spiritual beings, is beyond me. Boy, I had too many double negatives in that sentence. It's beyond me. And you see it in creation event. He goes, then the next thing he says, they will rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth. What is the point of this Hebrew idiom of what he's saying? It says that it is their job to subdue the world, the environment in which they live. They're the highest on the food chain, so to speak. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So notice what he's saying. He creates them according to his likeness, and he creates us in a way that we need each other. And then the next thing he says in verse 28, be fruitful and multiply and go fill the earth. And then subdue it and rule over it. So we're created in the image of God, male and female. We're given a responsibility to be fruitful and multiply. How does a male and female be fruitful and multiply?
Through the act of sex.
Exactly. So see how in the creation event, our very nature, physically and spiritually, is imprinted with this notion that we are going to be fruitful and multiply. Mm-hmm. This is why I tell people all the time, especially young men, your sex drive is not evil. Your sex drive is not a perversion. Wanting to think about it, being driven by it, is a reflection of God's image in you. Your drive is not the problem. What is the problem? The way your society says to fulfill it. The society says, fill this drive this way, and then you will achieve intimacy, but that's the illusion, right? And that's the subtitle, right? It's the intimacy illusion. So notice then we jump over to chapter 2, and we look at this. For this reason, so now we do a deep dive on our nature out of chapter 1 into chapter 2. This reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. They shall become one flesh. So what's he referencing? All kinds of things. He's not only saying the two become one spiritually, right? But the also, through the act of being fruitful and multiplying, what do you produce? One flesh, right? So it's both, see? And what's fascinating here is he goes, this is verse 25 is a very powerful verse because this is all about intimacy. The man and his wife were both what? naked, and they were not ashamed, right? There was no shame. What is the number one problem with sexual intimacy among couples? It always revolves around guilt and shame. Isn't that interesting, right? So here's the principles. I want to recap them real quick. Intimacy, both spiritual and physical, is a part of our nature. We're driven to want to be physically intimate. We are driven to want to be spiritually intimate. Our spiritual intimacy is meant to be filled by God walking in the garden with him. Our physical intimacy is meant to be fulfilled by what? In a covenantal relationship where the two become one flesh. We cannot fulfill the goal of being fruitful and multiplying without being sexually intimate with someone of the opposite gender. When we are authentically intimate, we can be unashamed. In essence, it means we are completely open, we're completely vulnerable, we're trusting, satisfied, and at peace.
We're exposed.
We are exposed.
Which is the title of the series.
Man, you guys did a great job. So as you can see, according to the Bible, the definition of human nature is that our souls are designed for intimacy. That's the point.
Yeah, I think bringing that forward especially because it's so interesting that the world and our culture has basically divided things into either you need to be out having sex all the time, or if you are desiring sex, you're wrong. Yeah. Everything's wrong with you. You are the worst, and you need to just control it, right? And
so notice how that's such a division. You bring that up so well. It's like it's either do it all the time, all you want with whatever you can, which is wrong, or it's evil and don't have anything to do with it at all.
Right.
Both of those are Gnostic thinking.
Right. And it sets you up for failure on both sides, right? Because it's like you've heard horror stories of like, oh, well, I was always told sex was bad, and then you get married and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. You have that issue, or you are out with 450,000 different partners and then nothing ever matches up or whatever, right?
Yeah, and so both are empty and both are unbiblical.
Right. And so I think it's so important that we talk about this. And I mean, it's always, you always get a little shifty in your seat when you're like, oh, the pastor's going to start talking about sex. It's like you may bring more people in, but everyone's always like, well, what's he going to say? What's he going to do?
We're talking about sex in the end times.
Right. So I think we just need to really dial in, like, why are we getting so confused about intimacy? Because you're saying we are programmed for intimacy, and sex is one of the ways to intimacy.
Yes.
But there's a breakdown in our thinking and what has been taught on the process and where it fits.
Well, it all comes down to sin, because what we were reading was before the fall, right?
Right.
And then the fall happens. Most people don't have a clear understanding of what sin really is. And let me try and establish a more clear understanding of it. The word for sin, particularly in the New Testament, it's a Greek word, and it is hamartono. Okay. Now, generally in Greek, you don't roll your R's, but I'm just so used to rolling my R's. I'm so used to rolling my R's that it's hard for me to not do it. It means to be, this word sin means to be without a share. Okay, so if you have
Are we talking stocks? Because I don't do that.
Well, let's say you're in a family, right? And the family has a farm, and you're a member of the family.
We're talking like inheritance level, stuff.
Yeah, you don't have a share. Okay, you are now without a share, so you've lost legal standing. Number two, it's missing the mark. Okay, it also has to do with, it's like a visual term, and that is, man, I've missed. If you're shooting a bow and arrow and you can't hit the bullseye, then it's like, oh, you've sinned, you missed the mark. But it also has to do with this notion of wandering off the path. So I'm a little bit lost, right?
Yeah.
I'm meandering.
Yeah. My father-in-law taught a class a few months ago, and he used this phrase that has really stuck with me of like, Satan very rarely, or sin very rarely, like makes you do a 180 when you're walking down the path and you start walking the other direction, right? What it usually does is it slowly bumps you off. And so rather than going true north 0 degrees, you're at 359. But if you walk long enough in that direction, you look to where you're supposed to be, that angle increases the longer, right? Like you get further and further away from the path, even though you're just slightly off, right? And so the idea of sin is, I would assume, is kind of the same thing.
Very
it's like
similar.
It's very easy to start getting just little ways off, and then it ends up further down the road, you're way off.
Basically what it's saying is it is your inability as an individual to be perfect,
Yes.
right? And so if you're imperfect and you're missing the mark or wandering from the path, then that means you can't become what you were meant to become. Now, what's interesting is that there is also a community aspect to sin. Okay. In Judaism, one of the things that they were required to do, every village, every town was required to do, is one of the priestly duties was to take a goat, right? And they were supposed to cast all the sin of the village or the community on the goat, and then they were to drive that goat out into the wilderness, and it'd be devoured by animals. That's the term scapegoat. That's where it came from.
Okay.
And so there's this notion of communities, because of the impact of sin, can never quite hit their mark. This is why attempting to establish a utopia on earth is never possible. Okay. It's like saying, well, you have a flawed person plus a flawed person plus a million other flawed people. How in the world can all those people make a perfect society? You can't. It won't happen. But what's really interesting is, and this is where we can't think Gnostically, we have to think holistically, and that is the physical realm and the spiritual realm are together. And Jesus and his incarnation proves this. And what's interesting is the creation also has been influenced by sin, right? And so Romans 8, chapter 18, Paul makes this argument. He says, now I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us or to us. For the eagerly awaiting creation waits for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who had subjected it in hope, that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption and into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. This is why children get cancer. This is why tsunamis wipe out innocent villagers. This is why these things that seem so random. Why? Because Adam, when he brought sin into the world, he not only corrupted individual human beings, he also corrupted communities of people. And finally, he corrupted creation itself. Creation is out of whack. And it's never been ultimately what it was intended to be when God created it. And this, Paul's particularly making this argument. He said, because sin was brought into the world, it was subjected by God in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So what is he saying there? When we read that passage back in Genesis, what did it say? He said, I want you to go, be fruitful and multiply. And then what are you to do with the earth? You are to
subject it.
Subject it. You are to subdue it. So in its pure form. So what is he saying is that the creation now is waiting to be set free in the freedom and the glory of the children of God. And then he says, verse 22, for we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now, which he's talking about. Jesus Christ has shown up, and so now the potential of it being set free is before us. And so what's interesting, there is something going on between our soul's desire for intimacy and our soul's thirst for intimacy, and then the corruption of this desire of physical intimacy within ourselves, in our communities, and in our world. And this is why there's so much confusion. When the soul is thirsty, when it longs to be satisfied, it seeks for something to quench the thirst, the emptiness, the longing of the soul. And God created intimacy to fill this thirst, both spiritually and physically, through sexual expression, the physical side. The entire point of this series is to discover what you really are thirsting for and then how to experience the quenching of that thirst. So you're going to have to pull back all the illusions, and if I may make a pun, pull back all the covers that the world has created around sex and sexuality. I hope that we can do a deep dive into this, the meaning of sex, its role in intimacy, and why many of the answers of our world and what it's come up with, including answers sometimes in the church, as you pointed out earlier, simply don't work because they are an illusion of intimacy. They are not the real thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for getting us kicked off on a spicy subject for the next couple weeks. I'm excited.
Tell all your friends.
Tell all your friends. This will be a great series to invite people to because it's something that affects us all. It's something that is in the news. It is in the media. It is in our lives on a daily basis that we are struggling with and trying to figure out how does this actually work. This is a great time to start having that discussion, just like when we were talking about mental health. These are topics that people are dealing with daily.
Yes.
And we need to be talking about them because this is the only way we're ever going to dispel these illusions that have taken over the world. We are going to, like I said, on Friday, be launching the Salty Pastor website. Make sure you're subscribed and liked so that you know when that happens.
On YouTube, right?
On YouTube. And or if you're on the Foothill, any of the Foothill socials, those will also have the big announcement that it's launched as well. So those are great. But make sure you are on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform doing that because we're going to have some really cool features, some that'll roll out right at the start, and then some that Pastor Doug and I have been talking about that'll come out a little bit later. So those are things you're going to want to be continuing to check out. One of the things that you're also going to want to do, just a reminder, these next few weeks are going to be about these mature subjects. So proof your episodes before you decide to share them with your kids. Yes. Or maybe these might be ones that are better off waiting till a future date for them to listen to. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you on Thursday here on the Salty Pastor Podcast.
Blessings, and keep thinking for yourself.